Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, Link's wearing Uggs, Zelda is bae, we're updating the classics. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with ya. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's always fun to hear the music live when we're recording the show in person, because when we record it remotely, you insert the music afterwards. So we just observe a moment of silence every time the transition music would be happening.
Right. It is a brief moment. I feel like we don't get quite as hyped up as we normally would, and I don't wait the full length of time because I'm going to chop up the episode anyway.
Yeah.
But now when we're doing it live, and then we'll put that in quotes because I push a button on the keyboard. But I feel like just experiencing the time that passes with the listener, I feel like we're more in tune with them. I feel like we're going to have a good show. I think they're going to have a good show. I could not be more excited about what we're doing today.
I completely agree. And I don't want to delay getting into it too long, but I am dying to know, what is the Mars Wisconsin Cheese Castle?
Okay, so you added the word Wisconsin to it.
That's not in
which
there.
I don't appreciate.
Is it Kenosha or is it just the Mars Cheese Castle?
So it is in. So this is a landmark store that I went to on my recent visit to my hometown of Kenosha, Wisconsin.
But not your first visit.
No, not my first visit. I have been many times. And you had asked me before we started recording, what is the Mars Cheese Castle? What does one do? Because the name conjures. What does it conjure? Like a castle made out of cheese on the planet Mars, or perhaps the home cheese castle of the Roman god of war, right? Like one of these two things. In reality, it is a sort of combination souvenir store, liquor store, grocery, deli,
cheese
bar.
Castle.
Well, there's a lot of cheese.
Okay,
in it.
yeah. That's really all I hope for. It would be disappointing to hear they dabble in cheese. There's a little bit of cheese.
They're way into cheese.
Okay.
There is a facade to the place that makes it look like a castle. But Mark, would it surprise you to learn that was not always the case?
Yeah, it would actually. That does surprise me.
It was not always the case. There was a long time where it was just like a regular rectangular building.
Yeah, I'm glad that they rectified that.
Yeah,
I would be
livid.
I would. I'd be really disappointed if somebody was like, "Hey, I'm going to take you to the Mars Cheese Castle,"
right?
And just roll up, to like I'm going to say TJ Maxx, but what I meant was not Tahoe Joe's, Trader Joe's.
Yeah, there we go.
Just like a Trader Joe's. I mean, I guess all those would work.
That is likely what your experience would have been in like 1993 or something. But we got some beer there. We got some various glasses and mugs. I also got some spicy popcorn, some spicy cheese popcorn.
Okay,
there,
great.
To enjoy while watching the Bucks game. I guess I'm into the NBA now. Mark, we don't have time to really get into the ins and outs of my experiences in Wisconsin, but we do have to go over the fact that you could borrow my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. If you wanted to, all you gotta do is email us at nintendocartridgesociety@gmail.com and give us a mailing address so I can mail my copy of Sonic Forces to you. I pay for postage both ways. It is a hassle-free program.
Perfect program.
There is one hassle. There's a 50% chance that you will get a copy of Untitled Goose Game. Instead, same rules apply though. You play it for as long as you want, and then you send it back. And you are all the better for it.
If it's a feature or a bug to get Untitled Goose Game is really up to you. Like so much of the Sonic borrowing program,
right? It's not a feature, a bug. No, it's a goose.
Like so much of the Sonic borrowing program, however you view it, it is of course the perfect program.
Of course,
and there's no rules.
Right.
There's no rules.
Right. The rule is you have to send it back eventually. Yeah, that's it.
The other thing you can do is you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate it so much. If we will shout you out on the show if you leave us a review in the US Apple Podcast Store, that is where I check. But if you review us anywhere else, even if you just shout us out on Twitter, let us know. Send us an email, send us a direct message on Twitter, and we will shout you out on the show. We appreciate it very much.
Yeah, we like that a whole heck of a lot. Mark, we have a big topic today that I think we have decided is going to go into a 2-part episode. I say I think like we didn't nail it down before we started recording, but we are going to be modernizing, conceptually anyway, all of the games in the Legend of Zelda series, starting with the original. So let's get to it. Let's modernize the Legend of Zelda. Now, obviously, we're talking about this, right? Because Skyward Sword HD just came out. There are some quality of life improvements that make it a more accessible game in 2021 than the original was 10 years ago. And it kind of just got me thinking about like what it takes to make these older games both feel accessible in any way and actually fun to play in the modern day on modern hardware.
Yeah, I mean, we will get to Link's Awakening, but I feel like Link's Awakening is a good example of trying to thread a needle and, whether it was successful or not, because it's like, did they modernize it? Yes, it's like available on
Yes.
modern platforms, different graphics, all that kind of stuff. But is it like as there are still flaws in the game?
Right. Does it provide enough of a modern gaming experience? And I think one of the things that makes this so difficult for Zelda games, and like a lot of them have been remade or remastered or represented in one form or another. But I think one of the things that makes it so hard for this series is that Zelda is always, or is frequently at any rate, a game that is built to the limitations and the specifications of the hardware, right? One of the first things that we see is like, here's an example of how the Wii works is Twilight Princess, right? Like that's swinging the sword with the remote. That's using the nunchuck as like your method to actually make Link run around. It is as though the system and the game were built like in tandem, right? Like, and you see that in the Phantom Hourglass and just so many of these games where you're like, oh yes, this is clearly designed for this very specific hardware in mind. Which like you can sort of see that in other Nintendo properties, but like Zelda is really bearing that banner. I feel like more than anyone else.
Yeah. And so I guess, do we want to just kind of dive into it?
Yeah, let's dive into it. We are going to start by talking about the original Legend of Zelda, originally released on the Famicom in 1986, not 1968. That would be wrong. And then 87 in North America and the rest of the world. So the slight difference between those two releases is in Japan, it was released with the password feature, and when it came out in the rest of the world, it had the battery like save feature, which would then like come back to Japan later. So that is like slightly different versions of the release. The game has been re-released a bunch of different times. We don't really need to go through all the different times it's been released, but it's been largely unchanged the entire time.
I mean, it's a stone cold classic, so this is a pretty presumptuous one of us to start with, because The Legend of Zelda, it's a classic,
still works.
Yeah.
And to what I was saying before about like Zelda games being made for the platform that they're on, I'm always amazed by Nintendo's ability to take the limitations of whatever hardware and actually like deliver a magical experience out of it. Like you can look back on so many other games that like seemingly have ambitions beyond the hardware or beyond the limitations, that like you have to sort of like squint to see what it is. And Zelda's just like, no, we mean to tell it this way. And I feel like the original Legend of Zelda is a great example of that. But we're going to throw all that mastery out the window.
Well, I think that's what's tricky about it, because it is like a stone cold classic. And on the one hand, it is a perfect game.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's not a perfect game.
This is correct. Because it's obtuse, right?
Right. And that is some of the joy of that game. I think one of the reasons why The Legend of Zelda became such a hit was because there was a lot of it that was really obtuse. People people just ended up spending time like trying to burn every bush on the map.
Right.
Right? You know, like it felt like such a at the time such a revolutionary thing that you could explore endlessly, similar to kind of how like Breath of the Wild felt, for me when I was playing it. And
Well,
but
I mean
like
that's an interesting comparison to draw, right? Because we've all seen like the screenshots of the sort of Breath of the Wild prototype that they made in the Legend of Zelda like engine, right? So that they just like built up the physics engine and were like, let's just execute it in 8-bit. So like I think for me, that's where I start the idea of like how to remake, remaster, whatever. I mean, I think it's a game that you could just re-release all the time. They basically have just like going through it was re-released on the GameCube and on Game Boy Advance and the Wii and the 3DS and the Wii U on the NES Classic Edition, the NES Switch Online, and it's going to be in the Zelda Game & Watch, right?
right.
So I think you could just put it out and that makes it acceptable for modern audiences. But here's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see, instead of Breath of the Wild in 8-bit, I want to see the original Legend of Zelda in the Breath of the Wild engine.
Interesting.
Exact same map, exact same enemy placement, exact same order of dungeons and whatever. Dungeons in a Breath of the Wild like game. Just do that in the Breath of the Wild engine.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's a huge undertaking.
It's a huge undertaking, but for me, that kind of feels like Link's Awakening syndrome, where when I replayed Link's Awakening, I loved the game. It was such a fun experience. I really got frustrated with a lot of the dungeons and like did not enjoy the dungeons. And I feel that way about The Legend of Zelda. When you and I replayed The Legend of Zelda for we used to have a NCS Classics where we did like we would play a game and break it up into chapters.
Yeah.
We did that with The Legend of Zelda. You can go back and listen to those if you're interested. But like the obtuseness of the original Legend of Zelda, like I can appreciate, but I don't think is for me particularly fun to experience cold.
Sure.
Like the final dungeon in the
the
original
final
Legend of
dungeon
Zelda
is a mess.
is awful. Like I think it's a bad like it is not fun to play. It's not fun to try to like figure out like stumble your way through it. And I don't imagine that it would be more fun in 3D.
I mean, probably not, but I do think one of the things that would improve anyone's experience of The Legend of Zelda, or especially the last dungeon, is a map that is more explicit about, because that dungeon is so much like you have to work your way into some dumb little corner.
And you're warping all over the place.
And then you're warping all over the place. If there was a map that was more explicit about, like, these stairs take you over here, so that you could actually, like, map out where you're going. So yeah, I wonder if just, like, better signposting would help that game.
Yeah, it's weird. I think that's a difficult tension just because part of what made The Legend of Zelda so iconic is the fact that there was so much to discover and explore.
Right.
But my experience has been going back to it that is also what makes it very frustrating. That being said, like I wonder if it's like a little bit of both, right? Because I feel like Square Enix has been experimenting with remaking classic JRPGs in more modern engines.
Sure.
And I think it's, whether they're always successful or not, I think that is a way to modernize them. And usually like systems are updated a little bit, right? It's not like a one-to-one translation.
Right.
In the way I keep going back to Link's Awakening. And I do feel like it would be really cool to see The Legend of Zelda come back in that way.
Like in a really like substantive, like trying to take the spirit of the dungeon, take the spirit of the map, and like just represent it that way.
Yeah, and being like
I mean, there's also
not hung up on the fidelity.
Yes, yeah. Well, and so like this is one where it's sort of like really begs the question of like, if you're going to attempt a remake, like mean it, right? Like really work at remaking it. You can't just repackage it. You can't just put like 16-bit sprites on here or like, anime sprites or whatever and like pump it back out. Like you need to do something substantial to it.
Yeah, I mean, you have it here on the list. They did remake it in like for the SNES, right? With the Satellaview.
Yes. And we'll get to Satellaview games in a little bit here. but yeah, like they did sort of remake it in the Link to the Past engine, but also different from that too. The more I read about it, the more I was like, I don't think this is really a remake
Oh,
of
uh-huh.
it seems like maybe in spirit only. Um, but yeah, I mean I think like you gotta really mean it. And it is interesting how much this game has been untouched since then, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, some of it is like, how are you going to remake? It is almost like Breath of the Wild
Yeah,
is a spiritual remake of the original game,
totally.
because it's also like, why would you touch the original Super Mario Brothers?
Except they did a bunch of times.
That's right. That's right. They did. Well, should we move on to Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, or did you have more?
Yeah, I just had one more thing to
Yeah.
say about The Legend of Zelda, and maybe a way to make the dungeons more navigable, is
Mm-hmm.
just to have a visual distinction between rooms.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, yes.
because you end up walking in so many circles, and the game has a limited like visual palette, and you go into a dungeon, it's like this dungeon's all blue, and that's it. Like literally every room is blue, and so you'll walk into many rooms that look and or feel exactly the same. And if they felt a little different, you could sort of like get have a clearer view of like where you've just been and if you've been here already.
I'll tell you what it doesn't need to be,
Huh?
like Dark Souls.
No,
We don't need a remake of
we
Legend of Zelda
we
like
do
Dark
not
Souls.
we do not need that. All right, moving on to Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link on the NES and the Famicom, 1987 in Japan, 1988 in North America and the rest of the world. This is another one that has been ported over to just about everything. The GameCube, the Game Boy Advance, available on all the virtual consoles, on the NES Classic Edition, the NES Switch Online, and of course coming to the Zelda Game and Watch at the end of the year.
Overshadowed by everything that came before.
Yep.
And everything everything that came before.
Everything
meaning
that came
one game.
before.
All the Zelda games that came after. This is definitely like the George Lazenby Bond movie
Sure, yeah.
of like the Zelda series,
Where you're like, it's really a Diana Rigg movie.
and it's not bad.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like it's its own thing that flavor did not continue. And so
Right,
it like
right.
stands out. I think for me, Zelda 2 has so many elements of what we now consider to be like Metroidvania.
I agree with
That
this
if
assessment so far.
And Metroidvanias are more popular now than they have ever been, ever, thanks to, I think, like the indie game boom.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just lean into that and you make Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link a true like Metroidvania experience.
Yeah, well, and so do you do that with like are you suggesting like a specific indie developer or like another indie game that you would want to like mold Zelda 2 into that mold?
I'm thinking more like, and I don't think you have like Mercury's Theme do it, but more of that like Samus Returns type thing.
I mean, this is exactly where my mind goes. Is like just Samus Returns that bad boy. Present what is basically the same game with a very similar map and just sand away those edges.
Yeah.
Make it look nice. Add a counter attack button. This one, it's sort of 2D Dark Souls. This bad boy.
Well,
It may just be Hollow Knight. You're Hollow Knighting it.
It
Maybe.
is interesting. So thinking about this now, and it has been a while since I have played Zelda 2, and I was not familiar with it really before we played it. Like I didn't play it very much as a kid. It was not until we played it for the show that I like really experienced it. But it kind of does Skyward Sword-y type combat, right? Like in the sense where you are attacking the enemy, whether it's high, low, like that makes a difference. I don't have like a thought to tie that all together. I'm just like think that's interesting to see that kind of come back.
Well, I mean, just sort of like welcoming the like intensity of the combat and the specificity of the combat in a way that like it's not tied to just sorry, I'm all over the place here. But just to like tie it back to a style of Metroidvania that I don't think it should be like, that the attacks are not tied to Link's mobility. Like they're two separate things, right? So it's not something in line with like Guacamelee, for example. It is something probably more like Hollow Knight or like the combat of Dead Cells, without actually being like these sort of roguelite elements there. just being more like invested in like how Link actually fights.
Yeah, and so for me, I keep going back to the Samus Returns thing because
Yeah.
Samus Returns changed combat in Metroid and actually made it more like with the counter move, it made it more combat like and
Yes.
not just like there's a give and take to it in a way that wasn't part of Metroid before. And I don't need this for me this Zelda 2 Adventure of Link like Metroidvania to be uber challenging in the way that like a Hollow Knight can be.
Sure.
Like I'm content with it being that kind of like Samus Returns where it's like we're introducing additional mechanics. There are you can like you learn to become really good at this, but it's still possible for anybody to complete the game.
Yeah, sure. It is interesting to think about how Mercury Steam did what they did with Samus Returns, just because the game is like the whole point of that game is hunt down and kill all the Metroids,
Mhm.
right? So it's like in its premise, it is a more combat focused idea than the rest of the Metroid games. And I think Zelda 2 does have some of that. Like it is still like an explory kind of whatever, but like the bosses at the end of each of those levels is not like a trick to fighting any of them. You just have to be good with the
Yeah.
sword and board. Like that's it. So yeah, I think that that would be the way to do it is really lean into the combat, not necessarily making it super difficult, but just making it
A
specific.
feature
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Also, I'm trying to think of Metroidvania games that have like a big like world map for you to walk around in. I can't think of any. So that would
Yeah.
be interesting.
We're
anyways.
inventing new game types as we go. All right, next is a little bit of a diversion. You would think that we would move at this point to A Link to the Past, but we are instead going to talk a little bit about the Game and Watch games that feature Link and The Legend of Zelda as a property. There is a Zelda Game and Watch, which was in like the clamshell thing. It had 2 screens on it. There is a Zelda. This is not a Game and Watch. This is a Zelda Game Watch. It was a literal like wristwatch that you could like do some dungeon crawling on. And then of course Vermin. They're the version of Vermin that is going to be on the Zelda game, the Legend of Zelda Game and Watch that's coming out later this year. Vermin is basically like the whack-a-mole style game. And in the Game and Watch, it is of course Link, and he's bopping Octoroks instead of moles. Mark, do you think there's any way to present Game and Watch games now for modern audiences, or is that just like pure novelty?
Did you have like Game and Watch growing up? Like I had like a Tiger Electronics. The closest thing I had
Yeah.
was like a Tiger Electronics Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles type thing. And I put a lot of time into it because it's what I had,
Right.
but I never really liked those games. And so I'm never really drawn to them. But one thing that like comes to mind right now is when they re-released Mario 64 on the Nintendo DS.
Yes.
And they added like a bunch of like mini games
yeah.
to it that like featured the Nintendo DS like touchscreen, like
Yep.
utilized it. And I wonder if like that's a way to recontextualize these is put them on a mobile phone, right?
Yes.
Like
yes.
update the graphics, like maybe actually make the Zelda like they Nintendo just teamed up with some company to make like a uber expensive limited edition like digital like smartwatch basically.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, maybe you have one for Zelda and the Zelda Game Watch is like a feature on that.
I mean, can they just sell an Apple Watch app that is
Yeah, I mean that could be cool.
the Zelda Game Watch? Like I think mobile is 100% the way to go here. And probably what they should do with all their Game and Watch things, put them all up on the App Store for like whatever the lowest price point is.
Yeah, I
imaginable.
mean it's like you almost should just give them away.
You should just give them away.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's 100% right. And you can sell like alternate skins so that like to actually play the Zelda version of Vermin instead of just like regular old Vermin.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the other way to do this would be what we are seeing with the Zelda Game and Watch later this year, where
Right.
it's like, oh, we'll just release them as limited edition, like $50 re-releases.
Yeah.
So collectors can hoover them up.
Yeah, yes. And that's if you want to create a collector's market and frustrate most of it, then that's what you do. I've gone back into the office, Mark, and I brought my Super Mario Game and Watch in, and so it is plugged into a computer because it has to be plugged in so that it can display the time. and I see Mario like showing me the time all
That's
the time,
fun.
and it is great. It makes me very happy, and I can pull it down and play Mario when I'm bored. Um, but yeah, now I'm gonna have like a second one of these things. I don't know what I'm doing. All right, now we can move on to A Link to the Past, the Super NES slash Super Famicom game from 1991 in Japan, 1992 in North America and the rest of the world. Another one that has been ported just about everywhere. It was on the ported to the Game Boy Advance. This one was not in the collection of Zelda games that made it to the GameCube, but it's on all the virtual consoles except only the new 3DS, not the regular 3DS. It's on the Switch, this SNES Switch Online and the Super NES Classic Edition. I guess there's also the thing to note here that it has been there have been additions made to it when it was released on Game Boy Advance, but that is not the version of the game that I know, and not the version of the game that has been ported over to all these other places. But is that where you first encountered a Link to the Past?
I can't remember if it's where I first encountered it. It's definitely where I first beat it, like all the way through
Sure.
from start to finish.
So did you play in conjunction with that any Four Swords just Four Swords?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. But those two things, like I did experience them at similar times, but they feel like divorced experiences to me.
Okay. All right.
Like
Interesting.
yeah. Like Four Swords is definitely its own thing.
Okay. So, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, one of my favorite games of all time. Arguably my favorite game of all time.
Well, one of the things that is interesting about A Link to the Past,
Yeah.
is that A Link Between Worlds is very much inspired by like A Link to the Past.
One of the few times that they take like basically the same world map and transplant it on
And
to a new
so but I don't know that that's exactly what I would do.
Right, like just put it in that
Yeah.
in the new engine. Yeah, I don't know that I would either. Especially because like the way the three-dimensionality of A Link Between Worlds feeds the gameplay, right?
Yeah.
Because you keep turning into the painting and like gliding along the walls. You would feel it missing from A Link to the Past. This is honestly one where I'm stumped. I don't know how to bring it into the modern era.
Okay. I think where we have to start, as much as I hate to do this, because I'm such a positive person,
Oh
is
boy.
we have to look at the flaws.
Ooh, are
of
there
A Link to
any?
the- I
Seems
know,
like there
that's-
probably aren't.
That's also hard. It is kind of the perfect game.
Yeah. Like
I'm stumped.
I honestly don't know.
I don't really have any complaints about A Link to the Past. Would you change the art style? Why?
No, I don't think you would change the art style.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. None of the dungeons, I mean, like maybe towards the very end the dungeons get a little obtuse, but like
But never in like the worst way that some of the other Zelda games can.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I know I've got blinders up on this one, right?
Yeah.
But I just love it the way it is. I would never want to see it changed.
I don't have anything. I don't really have anything.
So there is an additional there are a few things that were changed in the Game Boy Advance version that I would like to see come back
Okay.
in a new release of the game, and maybe like it's a toggle you can turn it on and off. And you would just get these things instead of having to earn them through playing Four Swords. But there is a new dungeon, a side quest involving the lumberjacks, and so some new moves that you get by like earning it through Four Swords. And like I would just like to see just like a few more features, one extra dungeon, just like give me one more thing. I will pay full price for A Link to the Past.
I feel like I'm like shirking my duties here because it seems like we should come up with something, but I genuinely don't really know what needs to be changed about this game. I mean, like so many this has inspired so many indie games that want to like remind you of your experience with A Link to the Past.
Yes.
Like if it was released today as an indie game, it would be like
Oh
hailed
yeah,
as a classic.
it would be a new classic. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
absolutely. I don't know.
I don't know.
This is an impossible task.
I think A Link to the Past might be perfect.
Might be perfect.
Yeah.
So just keep releasing it every couple years. All right, Mark, we are moving on now to Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, originally released in 1993 and then re-released on the Game Boy Color in 1998 as Link's Awakening DX. And at this point, this is the color version of the game. It has the color dungeon. It has the camera shop and a few other things. And this is sort of the version of the game that persists in its many re-releases on Virtual Console and then eventually on the Switch in 2019. That is, it has the color dungeon, it has all those other things. 2019 also brought the like way brand new art style and Dampy the Gravekeeper and the what are the chamber dungeons, the sort of like build your own dungeon stuff. So it's been updated recently, remade or remastered. It's tough to say what it is because it's the exact same game. Otherwise,
I would say totally it is remade because everything had to be recreated from scratch.
Yes,
but they just chose to be very truthful to the original game.
Right,
like everything is one-to-one, tile for tile.
Right. So,
and I think that's the downfall of this remake. As much as I love the art style, I love the music, I love the experience of revisiting it. Almost like it is the perfect form of Link's Awakening as it was released.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of there are a lot of like parts of Link's Awakening that didn't age that well, and so you can they were able to remove some of those rough edges because there were more buttons to work with, so you weren't having to constantly dive into the menu to switch items and like those minor annoyances. But there's still like the problem that a lot of the dungeons are not fun.
Yes.
And go on too long, especially towards the end. The dungeons just become like really obtuse, really much too long, like that kind of stuff. And so, but I don't really know what to do with that because at that, like, how do you modernize what is there and not like change it too much?
Well, I mean, so here's maybe a strange take. Can we just redesign the dungeons? Like, can we take modern Zelda? Can we get the Twilight Princess team or the Ocarina of Time team to look at the original dungeons and take like the one core concept in them, the one item that you have to get through it, and just redesign the dungeons entirely?
Oh, that would be cool. That would be cool because I really do think the strength of that game is like the characters in the world, and the dungeons and the bosses not so much.
Yeah, oh man, the characters in the world are so good. This is a game where if they just did like a straight up sequel to it, and like Link landed on another island that was like in the dream of another mythical creature, I'd be like, okay, great.
Yeah, totally.
And just like meet similar characters again. Like I think that would be rad.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but like they kind of tried to do that with the Oracle of Ages.
Okay, they sort of let Capcom try. Is what happened. Interesting note here, Mark. With the Zelda Game & Watch, and I'm so sorry for bringing it up so much, but with the Legend of Zelda Game & Watch that's coming out later this year, that has the original version of Link's Awakening on it, not the DX version, which I believe makes it the first time that they're selling the original version since 1998.
That's really cool.
It's weird, right?
It is weird.
Because the other games on there are NES games, so it can do color.
Yeah. But I actually think it's kind of nice that like that version is getting out there again in some form.
Yeah, I agree. The sheer weirdness of it is totally worth it for me. Speaking of the sheer weirdness, let's move on to the next category here. We're going to discuss the Philips CDI Zelda games. This includes The Faces of Evil from 1993, The Wand of Gamelon, also from 1993, and Zelda's Adventure from 1995. What the gameplay of these games, they're sort of novelty text adventures with like graphics and stuff. Like
I think they're
text adventures with graphics and stuff is how I was describing it just now.
I think it's possible that one of them is, but they are, to my knowledge, all platformers. of
Okay.
one form or another.
Okay.
And not really like Zelda games as we know them, but like poorly controlling platformers. Um, do you know what? You know how Netflix just said that they were getting to like mobile gaming, right?
Okay.
And Netflix and Nintendo were also reportedly in very deep talks to create like some sort of Legend of Zelda TV show. And then those talks fell through after like somebody at Netflix leaked it to the press.
Right.
And but I think it would be amazing to see this come back as some sort of like remember when Netflix did like Black Mirror like Bandersnatch, like
Oh,
some sort of
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
choose your own adventure slash platformer slash mobile game. I don't know exactly how it would work, but it feels like it needs to be like Nick Arcade live action stuff going on.
Oh, that's pretty wild. So okay, we're like projecting ourselves into these games.
Not necessarily ourselves, but I just mean that because like when I think of these games, I think of that sort of like really awkward platform like setup, and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have like
yeah.
characters kind of like existing in the world but out of the world. And I don't know, I feel like it would be kind of a retro trip to modernize them a little bit.
What if we got and I understand that like my first impression of them being like sort of text narrative adventures is not correct. But what if they were all remade by Mages, the company that redid Famicom
Yes.
Detective Club,
Yes.
and just like did them up nice and proper, got rid of that like MS Paint aesthetic and like made it look like anime, and just gave us those same games, but just touched up, still with whatever clunk and jank is in there, but just looking very nice.
Yeah, or even like give it to mages or whoever to do like what you're saying, and you just like fix them.
Sure.
So you take the story, you take the idea, you take the levels, you take the mechanics, but it's like Billy Wilder said, and I'm butchering this, but basically the idea is like, don't like, why remake good movies? You should remake bad movies and
Yes.
make them good. It's like, yeah, you should take these three games and instead of being something that you are ashamed of and don't want to talk about, that would be the perfect way to celebrate Zelda's 35th anniversary. Bring us the Faces
Yes.
of Evil, bring us the Wand of Gamelon, bring us Zelda's Adventure, and be like, look, we took these games from the early 90s. They were a mess. We've made them like stone cold classics.
Oh my God. Okay, so I mean, this is maybe the pitch from here on out: is take whatever game and turn it into a classic. I mean, honestly though, like just taking the concepts of these games,
Mhm.
or even like give me the log line of each game, and then let a Nintendo studio like go to
Go
town on
wild, yeah.
remaking it. Like, let's just do that. There's nothing sacred here, right? Like, this is land that should be trampled because you're gonna kick up something more interesting than was already there.
Mhm.
So we don't really have a pitch. The pitch is just make them again.
Make them good.
Make them good this time. I feel like we're gonna have a similar reaction to the next category here, which is the Satellaview games, which were released for the BSX Super Famicom add-on in Japan in 1995 and 1997. The games are BS: The Legend of Zelda, which we already sort of talked about, which is a remake of the original Legend of Zelda in the A Link to the Past engine, and a game called Ancient Stone Tablets, which was an episodic game that ran for a specific hour, like an actual hour that you had to log on to the game and play and try and get as much stuff done during that time. It was sort of a sequel to a Link to the Past, except no one played as Link. You're all like either male or female avatars, and it's like a high score chase kind of thing that you could upload your scores and get like actual prizes from Nintendo. So this almost has a little bit of that like Nick Arcade element to it, where
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's sort of a game show too. I don't know.
So remind me,
Yeah.
I think I ask every time this comes up, but the Satellaview,
Yes.
the way that worked is like all of the stuff could only be played for a limited time, right? Because it was all tied into like television broadcast signals or something.
Yes, that's right. So they're broadcasting the game signal with like live music performance with live voiceover from actors. Actually, I don't know if it was live or pre-recorded, but it only happened at like a specific time as you were like tuned into it. And so I guess like the question becomes, is it worth trying to recapture any of these experiences without that like spontaneity or whatever, like the sort of time dependent?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like uh how I would want these modernized is let us play them.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
figure
Yes.
out a way to give them to us because this is a part of Nintendo ephemera, like Nintendo history
Yeah.
that is all like whispers and legends to me, right? Like
Yes.
I don't entirely understand how it works. I don't entirely understand what this experience was like and what a cool thing to figure out how to experience. And it is completely possible for them to do this I mean, this is basically just a live stream, right? It's
Yeah.
like
I mean, it's
that
kind of.
like HQ trivia
Yeah.
thing.
Yes.
Like this is totally possible. It is a Tetris Maximus Cup. It is a
Yes. It's an hour-long
Splatfest.
Splatfest. Yes.
It is possible. There is a way to do this.
And gimme.
How cool would it be? Like you are a Nintendo Switch Online. I mean,
Oh my
I
god.
guess like the real cool way to do it would like give it to everybody. But
But
like
okay, you can fork over the $19 a year.
if you're enough of a Nintendo nerd,
Yeah.
that you would be like, oh my gosh, I have an opportunity to play these like the Teleview games again.
Oh my
Then
god.
yeah, the $20 would probably be worth it. But yeah, that's all I want. It doesn't have to be updated graphics. You don't have to even make them good. Just
Right.
let me play them.
But I do think they need. So right now, it especially Ancient Stone Tablets only exists. It doesn't exist. A, but B, if it did exist and was playable somewhere, it would just be 4 discrete 1-hour chunks. For a max gameplay time of 4 hours.
I love it. I love it.
I mean, there is something very like cool and appealing about that. If they're like, every weekend, there's like 6 hours where you can do like the first hour, 6 hours where you can do the second hour. And I realized I said every weekend, and I'm really breaking it up into just doing it all in one day. But whatever, like there is something very appealing about that. And if they wanted to make like more scenarios, to be available for just a couple hours, like that would be cool too.
Yeah, totally.
All right, Mark. Now I think things get tough here because the next item on our list is The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, originally released in 1998. Has been ported and adapted a number of times. It is on the GameCube collection with Majora's Mask and the first 2 Zelda games. It also is on a disc with the Master Quest, which is the game with sort of remixed dungeons. It is available on virtual consoles on the Wii and the Wii U, and then of course remade in 3D on the 3DS in 2011. Not only is it in 3D, it has improved graphics, textures, and frame rates, revamped item system utilizing the touchscreen, tilt-assisted aiming, the Master Quest mode returns, and there is a boss rush mode. What do you do to update this game for now?
Especially because a lot of the stuff that, you could the easy stuff, a lot of it has already been done
Yeah.
in the 3DS remake. So my first thought was, oh, just like bring it to Switch.
Yeah.
But, like they've done it with Miitomo. Miitopia? Miitopia.
Yes. Miitopia, that's
Yeah.
right.
Miitomo, I think, was the short-lived like social
I believe you're
networking
correct,
app that
yes.
so they've done it with Miitopia, but I feel like the difference is that I don't think they could really get away with just like up-resing the 3DS's graphics
I agree with this.
for Ocarina of Time.
Yep.
Because it is such a like sacred touch point for so many people that I don't think that it would be received very well.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I think that if they put Ocarina of Time out on Switch, it would need to be a technical powerhouse. It would need to be a showpiece for what the Switch can do.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. If you found a way to start putting 3DS games on Switch, and you were selling them, and like you didn't up-res it or anything, they were just like 3DS Virtual Console essentially. Like I would buy games.
Yeah, so would I.
In that version. But I think as boring as it is, my pitch for this one is like take what was done for Ocarina of Time 3D and then
Just
redo
do it
the
again.
graphics.
Yeah.
Maybe you go like full tilt and you do an orchestrated soundtrack, something like
Yeah,
that.
that's good.
But as far as like quality of life improvements, I feel like the 3DS remake is what I want out of that.
Yeah, well, and also like I think at this point it is worth pausing to say that the Ocarina of Time 3D on the 3DS is like the model for how to improve these games while keeping them the exact same, right? Like it is undeniably Ocarina of Time, but everything about it is better. Everything. So like it's sort of as though Nintendo already did what we're doing 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're just saying do it again. Like
Mhm.
do another pass on it.
Yeah.
Um which should we move right then into Majora's Mask?
Sure, because I think that's way more complicated.
I agree. Majora's Mask originally released on the Nintendo 64 in the year 2000 and it required the Nintendo 64 expansion pass. I believe only one of two games that required it, right? That and Donkey Kong 64.
I'm not sure. That could be true.
Maybe Perfect Dark also. Not many games actually use this thing. It was available on virtual consoles on the Wii and the Wii U. It is part of the Zelda Collector's Edition disc on the GameCube and was remade for the 3DS as Majora's Mask 3D in 2015. Again, improved graphics, textures, and frame rates, a revamped item system utilizing the touchscreen, tilt-assisted aiming, and lots of little gameplay tweaks to make the game's time travel tasks more manageable.
Yeah, and like bosses were changed.
Yeah.
Like I know a big one that is really like a love or hate thing is they changed the way you control Zora Link when he's swimming in the
Yes.
water.
Yeah.
And so I still feel like the perfect version of Majora's Mask doesn't exist.
I agree with this.
Where it's like I want a little bit of the stuff that was changed for the 3D remake, but I want a little bit of the stuff originally that was in the original game, and like finding a way to. It's almost like I would love to see them just take a third shot at redoing this.
Right. And this is different than the thing that we said before of like just apply the same process again, so much as like go back to the source material and try to do the 3D remake again.
Yeah, yeah.
What is the name of the company? Grezzo, right?
Mhm.
That made this. I feel like Grezzo maybe got high on their own supply, right? And they were like, maybe that's the wrong. They were feeling good about their previous remake, and we're like, we can do whatever we want to make this game better, and they overstepped their bounds.
I wonder because obviously these projects are going to be like overseen very closely
Of course.
by Nintendo. I think that Majora's Mask is just a game with a more complicated legacy,
Yeah.
right? Like it is not to everybody's taste. It is a lot darker, it is a lot weirder than Ocarina of Time. It is almost like Zelda 2 in its like the system, the way you play Majora's Mask is so different from Ocarina
Yeah.
of Time.
Yeah.
The experience is so different from Ocarina of Time that uh, and there are people who love the original Majora's Mask, but I think in doing this, I think Nintendo was deliberate in trying to um almost align it a little bit more with the rest of the Zelda series.
I think
Even
that's
though
right.
like you're like, how does changing Zora swimming do that? I don't know. But that is my sense of it, is that they were like, okay, let's like
Well,
bring this back a little bit.
yeah, I mean, to your point about the Zora swimming, one of the things that they did is they slowed down the swimming speed, and that if you wanted to go fast, it like ate up your magic, which means that it makes it a less like dynamic sequence, but it also makes it easier to like control. Like one of the complaints with the original that they seemingly were trying to address is that like you couldn't do the finer bits of motion because Link is moving too fast. And so in some ways, that's like sanding off the challenging edges. And the game is about challenge, right? It's about Link having this oppressive challenge over his head at all times. It's the moon that's going to crash into there. And I wonder if like instead of leaning into remaking like the graphics and gameplay to be more like Ocarina of Time, if they leaned into the darkness and challenge of Majora's Mask. And so like maybe even the visual aesthetic isn't to just clean up the graphics, but maybe to stylize them further. Like maybe lean into a more, Burton-esque Corpse
Grotesque.
Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas sort of aesthetic, and like keeping that sort of cute that's off-putting, and really just putting that difficulty forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I For me, I don't need it to like. I think Majora's Mask's themes and everything are so weird and dark already
That's
that
true. That's
for
true.
me, like, I don't need it aesthetically to be weirder. I My boring answer is yeah. I just want them to kind of like forget Majora's Mask 3D, which I did not dislike. Like I had played Majora's Mask so far long before I played the 3D remake that I could not have told you what changed.
Right.
Like when
Right.
the
Right.
bosses were different, like I did not remember the previous boss. It was like, oh, okay. Like I had no idea. That being said, I would love to see a like another attempt forgetting that the 3D remake exists at like, okay, knowing another 10 years out, knowing what we know now,
Yeah.
with the tools available to us, how would I approach Majora's Mask starting fresh with that?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's also just like something, if they could just like sort of speed up the like time between the intervals of like setting the clock back. There is something very roguelite built into the structure of Majora's Mask, of like, how successful were you this time through? Okay, now go back and try it again.
Yeah.
That like, if there's just some of that like quickness of the retry, that it could improve the experience of playing the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Mark. Now we are moving on to territory that is very familiar to us, as we just finished playing one of these games. We are on to the Oracle of Ages and the Oracle of Seasons, originally released on the Game Boy Color in 2001. This is two games developed by Capcom and published by Nintendo. They were re-released on the 3DS Virtual Console in 2013. Mark, what would you do to these games? And I lumped them here together as sort of one game, but we can choose to either treat them as two separate games or as one game. What do you think?
I'm fine lumping them together just because we just really recently played Oracle of Ages.
Season. No, yes. Seasons was the one I thought we were playing.
You
I
played
messed
a little
it.
bit
I
of
messed up.
Seasons.
I messed
You
up.
played a little bit of Seasons. But anyways, my memories of the experience of both, assuming that I played Oracle of Seasons before, which I think I did, but it's possible that I played Oracle of Ages. The experience of the two is similar enough, and I think that the challenges of them are similar enough, like the things I would want to update are similar enough that
Yeah.
I'm okay lumping them together.
So where do you start? Because I think for me, I need like almost a teardown, right? That like, I need all the dungeons redesigned in the same way that we pitched for a Link to the
Link's
Link's
Awakening.
Awakening. I need the overworld tweaked so it's not as obtuse to try and traverse it, and I need all the characters rewritten to be more fun. So like, I would like to have the Link's Awakening Switch graphical style. So like, I sort of feel like tear it all down and build it all back up.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way too. And it's not that everything about Oracle of Ages is irredeemable. It's just that it's difficult. I just found it difficult to play.
Yeah. Yep.
And so like so yeah, I would want that too, because I think that what I would want is that opportunity to take the stuff that I like about Oracle of Ages and amplify that, and then turn down the volume on all the stuff around it.
Right. And to the point about turning down the volume, remake the soundtrack, because it is excruciating.
And by
to hear.
remake, like rewrite.
Yes.
Like, do not use the music that was composed for
Write
Oracle
new music.
of Ages. Yeah.
Write new music. Arrange it in the same way you did Link's Awakening, because that's beautiful and charming as heck. Here's something else I would like. I would want the two games to be released in a single package as one game. And when you do something in one game that has the ability to affect your gameplay in the other, that it like shows it to you or offers to like bounce you over to the other game, or whatever.
I mean, one game meaning in one package,
In one
not
package,
like
yeah.
combining the two games into a single experience.
But also sort of that, like, that you could have games going in like each one, and maybe like you're collecting shared heart container pieces, or something to just sort
Interesting.
of like encourage you to play both games together, either at the same time or one right after the other.
Yeah, because that's interesting. I wonder about that because the game is not short, right? One of the
That's
games
true.
is not
That's true.
short, and so trying to put them together, I wonder. Now, that being said, maybe the best way to experience these would be like a condensed version of each, like greatest hits
Yeah.
of both,
Smart.
and figuring out a way to make it like one cohesive experience. So instead of each one having 8 dungeons, it's like a total of 8, and we're just gonna take the highlights. By take the highlights, I mean like we're just gonna remake them almost entirely.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that does make sense. Is do like The Legend of Zelda Oracles, and then like mash the two games up together.
Because what is really frustrating or interesting, I guess, but frustrating in practice about these games when we replayed Oracle of Ages recently is that it is a game that was released in 2001, but feels like it was released in like 1991.
Yeah,
And so I had to keep reminding myself that, and it is a Game Boy Color game, right? So it is fundamentally based on the Game Boy hardware. But I had to keep reminding myself that this came out in 2001 because it feels creaky. Like the
yeah,
mechanics feel creaky. It just, in a way that like Link's Awakening has somehow escaped due to its charm. Like these games they're not able to like escape the quicksand of like being on Game Boy hardware.
yeah. Well, and I think this is the exception to the Zelda thing that I started the show by talking about. That like all the other games seem built for the hardware, whereas these two Oracle games are sort of built vision first, and then they crammed it onto the Game Boy carts.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe now free from the constraints of what the Game Boy cart can and cannot do, um, they can make some choices about what to keep and what to throw out.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a big overhaul. It's a big ask. We're saying remake two games from from the ground up, cram them together into one game. It's a tall order. I don't know that we're going to see that one. Mark, we are now moving on to the Four Swords, which was originally released on the Game Boy Advance, along with A Link to the Past in 2002 in North America, 2003 in Japan. And which was later remastered on the DSi and the 3DS as Four Swords Anniversary Edition in 2011, which also included a single player mode and two new dungeons. And it was only available to download for a limited time, was re-available for about a month in 2014 to celebrate A Link Between Worlds, and is currently not available to download anywhere in any form. What do you do with Four Swords? And do we also bring in Four Swords Adventure at this point as well?
So, Four Swords Adventure for the GameCube is interesting because it used the like Game Boy Advance connector.
Right.
I guess you could play by yourself, but really the way it was designed is almost like Triforce Heroes like,
Yeah.
where it's a multiplayer game first. So is Four Swords. And so really what I would like to see, Four Swords I think is cool. I think it is I had fun with it when I played on the original release on A Link to the Past for the Game Boy Advance. I re-downloaded it when I had the opportunity for the 3DS because I think it's like a cool thing to have. And as with most of this stuff, like I would love to see it preserved and released in like some form or another. That being said, I don't think it's like essential playing.
Yeah.
Four Swords Adventures for the GameCube, I've never experienced.
Yeah, neither have I.
And so this is one where it's like it would just be cool to have this one be available
Yes.
on a platform that I can experience it today, like the Switch. Like
Yeah.
the Switch seems like kind of like a cool system to do it on, especially I guess the Switch isn't really set up for it, but like if you could do it like you have one person's docked and
Yeah.
then actually why couldn't you do
Yeah,
this?
you could.
You have one person's docked and then everybody else is, using their systems in their hands basically like you did with like the Game Boy Advance connector to the GameCube.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think there's, we're sort of circling with like this and the Satellaview games, that there are these sort of like multiplayer or like just like these experiences that are impossible to get anywhere else, just because they're not like available or being streamed or whatever, that could very easily just be part of a sort of like Zelda multiplayer suite on the Switch Online, right? Like if they're just like, this weekend is Four Swords, this weekend is Four Swords Adventure, this weekend is the Ancient Stone Tablets, and you just know that like you can log in, you can play a little bit of Zelda with your friends, and it's going to be different than something you've been able to experience the rest of your lives. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, I know that Triforce Heroes exists, so they did something similar to this not that long ago. But really, like, selfishly, I would just love to see a new Four Swords Adventure game.
Yeah.
Built for the ground up on Switch.
Yeah.
Where it's like, great, yeah, multiplayer Zelda fun with my friends on a platform that I own. Like, give it to me any way you can.
Yeah, a platform that I own and that I'm like actively playing multiplayer.
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
that's
true.
true.
We'll get to Triforce Heroes at the end of next week's episode. As you can probably tell, we are nearing the end of this episode now. But when we get to Triforce Heroes, like I kind of just want that game on Switch because like that's where I've got a big friends list. That's where I'm like actively playing.
Yeah, just the ease of like doing it, right?
Yes.
Like you have your Switch. More of my friends have Switches than 3DSs. It's much easier to connect with people, like all that kind of stuff. I want that Four Swords experience, but I don't want to do the work of acquiring a GameCube, acquiring the Game Boy Advance cables, like acquiring Game Boy Advances. Like it's just not practical, right? Unless you're like a collector, then and I don't know. I'm torn about a lot of this stuff because it is on the one hand cool, in the sense that, wow, like that's like something that only a few people would be able to experience. Like the setup itself is neat. It's very of its time. But on the other hand, for the sake of just like keeping it circulating, like I just want another Four Swords Adventure game that's accessible to me.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe that is it. And maybe that is like the heart of all of this is like just another multiplayer Zelda game. And especially like the way that we play Switch, both as an online console and as a sort of like a local co-op situation, like just build in those options and like just to understand like the sort of difference between local co-op and online co-op and offer both in a 2D Zelda format. Like it's rock and roll. Like that's just what I want. Okay, so that is how we would modernize the first, I don't know, like 12 Zelda games.
Except for Link to the Past, your perfect baby.
The perfect baby.
Never change.
Never change. We love you. How would you change any of those games? You can write to us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com and let us know. All right, Mark, let's close this out. That, of course, means that we will be revisiting visiting, I guess, the second half of the Zelda game, the Zelda franchise, on next week's episode. Mark, there are some good ones to look forward to in there. We've got some DS games. We've got some Tingle games. Like it's going to be a good,
I can't wait,
convo. So check us out next time. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts if you like the episode. You can share it on Facebook or Twitter, wherever you share stuff. We like it when you do that. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Nincart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by Apipetti. You can get more of his music by going to apipetti.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Eller saying thank you for listening.
My name is Will Himes, and I am a ghostwriter, meaning I write other people's books for them. And I have a podcast called I Will Write Your Book, which are recordings of my meetings with my eccentric clients, such as a woman blocked after one sentence of a children's book about her dogs, a romance novelist who dislikes sex, and a man proud of having sampled everything in his local grocery store. This podcast has been described as fully improvised, played by some of the best comedians on the planet Earth. Hey, that's pretty good. That's I Will Write Your Book on Campfire Media.
Campfire.